Hey everybody, we're going to be talking about MIDI 2.0 and Logic Pro today. This is something I've really been interested in ever since MIDI 2.0 was incorporated into Logic. It was really incorporated on the hush hush. I mean, it wasn't something that was widely said that it now can do MIDI 2.0. It hasn't been very clear exactly how much it can do. And we have very few other things that can do MIDI 2.0. And so perhaps it's just laying the groundwork for what's coming next. Well, I have a Keystage keyboard. It's the PolyTouch from Korg. And this is one of the few, although we now have a number of other options, this is one of the few that says it does MIDI 2.0. And so I thought, let me see exactly what that means in terms of compatibility with Logic, what we can use this for. Is this something that any of you should look at getting? And it's complicated because MIDI 2.0 in Logic is certainly half-baked and not fully implemented to the extent to which it could be. Part of that's Logic. I believe part of that is the Keystage. And I'm excited to see when other keyboards now that are being released come out actually into the field, which of them will have more capabilities than this does. So let's take a look at some of the things that this keyboard can actually do as a MIDI 2.0 keyboard. It theoretically means that it's capable of doing the MIDI 2.0 property exchange. That refers to MIDI now being that two-way highway where it can not only accept MIDI but also can send information back. And property exchange most often means that things like these knobs here might be able to represent a plugin that's currently active, and the different parameters would automatically show up without having to do any sort of programming or connections or setting this up as a control surface, that it would just show up. Now, that is one of the things that we're hoping eventually will come to Logic, but as of this moment, the Keystage does not do the property exchange with Logic at all. And so I was thinking, what does that mean in terms of software being MIDI 2.0 compatible and a keyboard being MIDI 2.0 compatible and it just not working? It means that we're still in the infancy and no one is either following the protocol, or maybe they don't fully understand the protocol, or maybe they are just waiting to see before they put a lot of effort into making it work. That being said, it does work with some pieces of software with property exchange. I think that Ableton and Korg have some sort of deal. Even when you do that, I've watched other reviews on this, these 8 rotor knobs, when they show the parameters, it's limited to like the first 8 things, which of course in Logic, when we're doing that, we think of the smart controls down here and those 8. Sure, maybe at some point the smart controls will do the property exchange out with the 2.0 keyboard and we'll have control over that. Great. I mean, that's 8 things that maybe we didn't have easy control over before, but these knobs that we have on the keyboard do show what CC that they're using, CC 24, 25, 26, etc. And we can assign those using the smart controls in a relatively quick amount of time and make those useful for our smart controls anyway. So we have that ability to do that. But this keyboard is much more than that. And I think that that's important to note. The second thing that really we associate with MIDI 2.0, but it's a little bit separate in some ways, is that this thing is a PolyTouch. It means it's poly aftertouch and channel for each note or for each channel. It also has MPE, which is the MIDI polyphonic expression capability. And Logic does have that fully implemented. It does have it implemented to a certain extent. And so we're going to look at that because I think that that is one of the main reasons why I got this keyboard, is not as much for the property exchange, but so that I could actually have that polyphonic aftertouch or the MIDI polyphonic expression. And we want to actually break down each of those and talk about them because you have to choose on the keyboard which you're using, and you need to know why you're using one or the other. The last thing, and this is actually useful, we have a number of functionalities on the keyboard on the left-hand side here. Transport controls, we have an arpeggiator, and we have chord functionalities, and then a few other things, but we'll talk about those in a second. So let's talk about the MPE, or the Poly Touch functionality. So inside our settings here, we actually have to page through and decide which of these we're using. So there's AT mode, aftertouch, off. And you won't be able to see this easily, but we have channel, we have polyphonic, and then we have MPE. So let's go into polyphonic for a moment. We'll get out of our settings. And so now what that means is, and this is something I can demonstrate a little bit with my other keyboard down below, which is not capable of poly touch in that sense. So the bottom keyboard, a really nice big 88 key weighted hammer action, has aftertouch. So if I hold a low note and a high note, and after I'm holding them for a second, I use aftertouch by pushing a little harder on a key, it engages the filter. But when I do one key aftertouch, it engages the filter for both of them. It's like a global engagement of that filter. It's not on a note per note basis because the keyboard has just one aftertouch sensor capability. Do the same thing with this top keyboard. They're separate. So that poly touch is a big deal when using it with certain instruments like synthesizers, for instance. And we don't have to do anything with this. This is one part of Logic being set up this way that it works. Let's try one thing really quick while we have this open. I'm going to come in here and just turn off MIDI 2.0 for a second. Takes a minute. You'll see that polytouch, it doesn't matter. It's not a MIDI 2.0 exact thing with that. We sometimes are associating these things, but it's not. There's high resolution sometimes with the MIDI, but we don't even have that full functionality either. But you don't need to have that turned on to use the polytouch. Here's the thing about polytouch, and I'm going to record just a note doing this. I actually use my transport on the keyboard here. Right? So I went back and forth on those notes. You can see the data here. If I double click onto this to open up the editor, and we come down to our automation lane, here's the thing. We do have this thing where it says channel 145 effect number 2 LSB, although there's nothing there. Note velocities are there. But if I come to aftertouch, there's nothing. I can't see any of the data I just created. If I go to automation up here, I can come down and we can try to see aftertouch. And again, nothing is there. And it doesn't even show any MIDI lanes being used whatsoever. So it's interesting. Let's go to the region. And the region would be what was down below as well. So it's not going to show anything for aftertouch. I did aftertouch on 2 notes, but it doesn't actually get put into the region. Somebody out there has probably read some sort of Reddit or something else about why it's doing this. I haven't seen anything why it's doing that, but the polyphonic aftertouch is working. It records the data. We can go back here and actually... Although it looks like it didn't even get that top note that I played. I must have started it just a hair early. Anyway, it's funky. It gets put in there, but it's not editable as far as I can tell. That means great We have polyphonic aftertouch, but it becomes useless unless you perform it perfectly. That seems like a little bit of a flaw to me. That's okay, because we have option number 2. Go to our settings page into that, and we're going to do MPE mode instead. This is the MIDI polyphonic expression. And we'll delete that region. Put this out of the mode. Now, my big keyboard again, not capable of doing MPE. The Logic Control app is on the iPad. So that's one place you could use this. However, this keyboard has the MPE functionality. Let's open up our retro synth for a second. I'm going to do the same thing for 1 second first, and you'll see. Right now, I push down harder on one note and they both go. That means MPE is not currently turned on. Poly Aftertouch works without having to turn anything on. We have to come down into the plugins that this is capable of. In Logic, this is called MIDI mono mode. I have to turn it on. There's 2 different things. The common bass channel 1 seems to be, it's fine. Just use that. Separate. They're separate again. It feels just like I was using the original mode, but now we're in MPE. I have to remember, turn it on per plugin that you're using this. If I record something, right, we've got both of those notes. We can come into our automation, and now you're going to see down here used channel 2, note velocity, channel 3, note velocity, channel 2 aftertouch, channel 3 aftertouch. This is the system it does this with. It puts them on different channels. This is fine. And actually, I think I need to do a video on how to create this data without having to have an MPE keyboard. I have learned a lot in the last 48 hours about this. Here's the one note. We'll go back and you can see this. If I go to channel 3, you'll see that that's the other one. And there they are. So we can edit this data. It's in here as aftertouch just on different MIDI channels. Now, the way that it does this is not that each note is attached to a specific channel, but that it rotates through the channels for any of the given notes that are playing at that moment. And so it's using like this rotating system of different channels as far as I can tell. Because if I come here and change this note, still channel 2 aftertouch, this still works. Right? And so we can actually use that system as it was designed to make this work. Cool. So MPE, it's really, really nice on a keyboard to be able to use the aftertouch as an expression thing and have it just be on the notes that you want. Right? So that's really handy. I love that ability to be able to have the MPE. And that's one of the main reasons I have this keyboard now. Is to have that type of control over the synthesis and the tools that I'm performing with. Okay, let's look at a couple more things with this, because I do think it's important to understand a little bit more about MIDI 2.0 in Logic and a little bit more about this keyboard and what it's capable of. So first and foremost, when you're using this, the main thing that we have in Logic when you turn this on is the ability to have finer resolution for your MIDI data. Now, it doesn't give us more, even though the resolution is more. What we can do is now see the data either as MIDI 1.0, and that's a 0 to 127, or with 2.0 we get 0.0 to 127.9. So it's that point The decimal point gives us more resolution, or we can see this as a percent. Now this keyboard, like I said, doesn't have that type of capabilities. We can't do velocities in real easy ways that show that. However, I have seen this, so this is a great example. This one, if I hover, shows 58.0, and I have noticed some notes coming in between. This is 80.2. Now, as far as I understand, this keyboard doesn't give us a lot of that finer resolution, but sometimes I'm getting the finer resolution anyway. It's interesting. And I don't believe that we can... Well, let me just go into the velocity tool for a second. You'll see the velocity tool is capable of giving us that finer resolution with instruments that can do it. And I don't know if I'm hearing much of a difference with that synth, but it is possible. Okay, so let's look at, just for one more second with this, I'm going to switch this out to a couple other instruments because retro synth is just one of so many. We're going to look at studio piano for a second, and you'll see we don't even have a little drop-down menu for this to switch to that. And we don't have anything that we can do with aftertouch on it. An example, new instrument, we don't have that part because why would we for that? I do want to look at the horns for a second. Dropping down here, we don't have anything as well. Although, I feel like we should in some ways. We'll turn on via control and dynamics controller. Well, we have lots of things we could do that with, but not exactly the same. This would be one that I could see a use for. Let's look at another synthesizer for a second. And with this, you'll see we do have it. And this one's turned on by default, which is kind of interesting. But not every patch is something that's actually going to use it. So, aftertouch not happening anything with that one. I'm just picking random ones at this moment. Because of the performing pads, we often don't find that this is actually doing anything with it just naturally. But it is built into it as an option, and some of the pads and other presets actually do stuff with it. Okay, another example of something that is in there but doesn't necessarily always work with it. We do have a bunch of older instruments that theoretically could take advantage of this. But again, we're at the mercy of the patches that do this. So this is a patch on the ES2. But let's actually turn this into polyphonic. So, besides distorting out the end, that is an old instrument that can handle the MPE data. So, some of these instruments are going to be very useful for this, and other ones that just wouldn't make sense to have it in the first place, we don't have it in the first place. Okay, that's all I wanted to say about the MPE functionality. Super cool. The last thing I'll say about this keyboard, in addition to having the arpeggiator and the chords is just like a chord trigger. You can actually go through and do some editing with that. I'm probably not going to use the chord functionality very often. The arpeggiator as well, we have a good one in Logic, but if you really want to use it, then you'd have to come through and actually set it up. There's let's see, MIDI see, synchronization MIDI. This is where we would set this up on a project by project basis, mind you. But we would do Keystage control, send the clock information. And that way, when you're pushing play, so if you really want to use the arpeggiator on the Keystage, then just set up the clock to get sent to it so that the tempos align from your Logic project and the Keystage. Okay, last but not least, this keyboard is also an audio interface. It has 1/4-inch outputs and a headphone jack on the back of this. So you can actually hook up speakers, hook this into a system. You could use your headphones. You can put it has a nice little tray that I'm not using right now just for the space. But you can put your iPad on it. You can also switch it to be horizontal as a tray and put your laptop on it. I mean, this thing could be both your MIDI input and your audio output. And I think that is one of the areas that's really ingenious in some ways. In order to use a lot of the keys and things on here, one of the things you have to do, I'm going to drag this page over, is you have to go to their website and you have to download this Keystage Control Surface script for GarageBand and Logic. Once you install that, turn on Logic, plug in the keyboard with Logic on, and it will automatically recognize. And then we have this set of functionality added. So you can play, stop, record, loop. You can turn the metronome on and off. You can undo. You can go to next track, previous track, rewind, or fast forward. And all of these work once you install that script based off of the buttons at the top here. You do also have to come in here to the controller mode and switch Logic on that first page. Okay, whoa, that's a lot. MIDI 2.0 with Logic, still not great. This keyboard offers a lot, though, to be liked. What we need, though, is a company that's willing to talk to Apple and the Logic team and make some of these connections so that property exchange works, that we can use these knobs a little bit better instead of having to program them individually, which we can do. That's easy. But it would be a lot nicer to be able to have some of that stuff work automatically. Okay, I hope this was a useful look for some of you thinking about MIDI 2.0 in Logic, specifically with the Keystage. But now that we're getting more and more keyboards, I think we're going to have this discussion more and more often. So I hope this was useful, and I'll talk to you later.